Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Something Something podcast. My name is Eric Kasloff, and with me, as always, is Larry Sands. Party on, Larry.
Party on, Eric. Party on. As I
Well,
brush the hair back from my ear.
all right, Larry, I'm going to let you talk first about what's going on in your life because something magical happened over Facebook Messenger for the show, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, one thing that so I'm here in Texas right now, right? And we took my nephew to downtown. We're in San Antonio. So I took my nephew and I was just walking around and I come across this ghost tour. And so I was like, "Oh my God, here we go." So I'm gonna be emailing a couple of ghost tours.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off right now. You don't
Uh-huh.
have to
Why?
because over Facebook, I talked to the Iowa City Ghost Hunters. They are going to be emailing me by the end of the night about having them on the show.
That is so awesome. Oh my God. Yes. Yeah. Hey. We could start a new paranormal activity podcast.
Yeah.
This would be cool. That's awesome, dude.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
again, the hard thing about doing a podcast with one of your best friends is something awesome happens and you want to tell him right away, but you wait for the mic to turn on.
I know that's what you called me right before, and it was like, I got something to tell you, but I'm not gonna tell you because I'm gonna get on air and I'll tell you on air. So that's
Um,
very cool,
if it's
man.
your first time listening to the podcast, I make horror movies, so I love all things spooky. Larry is a sissy, so he doesn't like anything spooky at all,
No,
but
that's
he loves ghost hunter shows for some reason.
right. Well, that and Hallmark.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
but
Hallmark.
there's the Good Witch on, and like a
I thought
couple.
that was Larry. Don't act tough. You know that show's too much for you. You've
That's,
called me many a late nights, and I had to soothe you to sleep after watching it. All right.
actually, we should have Hallmark Channel sponsor us as much as we talk about them. Or scratch that. I talk about them. I love them. I'll tweet at them sometimes. Who knows? That's
Well,
awesome, though.
you
That's
know,
cool. How did you get a hold of them?
I was Googling ghost hunters for like an hour, and they were the first ones to respond.
Nice, nice. They are
Yeah.
the first ones, and then
Um,
after, boom, 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 we're gonna
because
get
I'm going
more.
to let this up now. We're near the end of September. We have a backlog of podcasts that I am going to be putting up all of the old ones up really soon because on the Something Something channel, it's going to be Horror Month as well as on my personal YouTube channel. It's going to be all things Halloween this month.
Very cool. So, Eric, I wanted to ask you real quick, what inspires you in general, whether it be filmmaking, filmmakers, what inspires you?
Getting to entertain people. Getting
Okay.
those few minutes when you could be having someone watching a movie or listening to a podcast, reading a book, they're not thinking about the darkness that's around them for that 90 minutes or however long it takes someone to read a book. You wouldn't understand reading books because you're illiterate.
No, I read the internet. What are
But
books?
no, it's getting to help people not think about their problems. When I worked with teenagers at my church, that was another huge thing that made my life have meaning was just getting to be there for kids and stuff like that. So those are the things that inspire me in all seriousness. What about you, Larry?
That's very good. I think uh being creative obviously inspires me. um my wife, my daughter, my mom inspire me to be really good and to be good for them, because I really need to, you know and I think that's one of the good things about our podcast is because no matter how crappy, I know sometimes I feel down and stuff, but we have guests that come on and we get to talk to them about their creativity and about the things that they have pushed themselves through.
Yeah.
And I find that very
Very
inspiring.
encouraging.
And I say that because I think, and we've been doing our podcast for a while, which has been good. It's been great. But rarely do we get to talk to somebody that has such an inspiring story,
Yes, most
you
definitely.
know? And before we go on, our guest is Sheryl. Hello, Sheryl.
How's it
Hi.
going, Cheryl? Thanks for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, if now you are, gosh, where should we start? You know what? I'll just have you introduce yourself and explain who you are in a nutshell.
Okay. So the short answer is that I am a physician and I work as a hospitalist. I take care of patients in the hospital who are sick enough to have to stay in the hospital overnight. Um, I wasn't always a physician, and I believe I could even become a physician because I grew up in a very dysfunctional home and I went through quite a bit of circumstances when I was younger. I spent several years on the streets of Hollywood homeless when I was a teenager. And when I survived that, I went to college and raised a family and went into medical school. So I wrote a book about it to tell people about that journey.
Wow.
That's very
Jeez.
it's okay. I'm super interested because I've always wondered what it took for a person to be able to lift themselves up and out of their situation and to better themselves. And not only that, and we'll get into what you're doing now, but to better other people. But um, how in the world did you find the strength to do what you did and have become who you are?
It's a question I've asked myself many times. I am not really sure what helped me to survive. I was described by other staff members who helped take care of me when I was a youth on the streets as the kid who didn't care. I didn't care what happened to me. I didn't expect to live to be 18. I fully expected to die in some horrible way before I became an adult. And what turned my life around was when I became pregnant with my daughter. And at that point, I would do anything to get off the streets. And she literally saved my life.
Wow.
Now, I must say the people that normally listen to us are, and we talk to writers and filmmakers and I think, I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, I don't think we've talked to anybody with such a background such as yours, but in the same token, it's a background that you have overcome, and you're so inspiring. um and I feel this sense of treading lightly around this. How do you feel when you talk about your book? Do you relive, because I know like some artists, like songwriters, they just say, oh man, every time I sing lyrics or every time I read a script, I go back to where I wrote it and when I wrote it and how I felt. So and I know we're kind of jumping ahead because usually what we like to do is talk a little bit about how you became, but how you wrote your book and you became a doctor. But I
Yeah,
think,
let's start to the beginning. You mentioned that you had a
yeah.
rough home life. So take us to chapter one, and then, we'll lead the way to the happy stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So, chapter one goes into a story of when I was 5 years old. And I tried to sneak outside in the middle of the night. I had an idea that I was going to leave home and find new parents. And my dad and my oldest brother intercepted me in the side yard. And I think they knew what I was doing, but we never discussed it afterwards. They told me to go inside and pretended it never happened. So that was the beginning when I started to notice that something just wasn't right in my family, because most 5-year-olds don't try to run away in the middle of the night.
Yeah, that's a safe bet. So are you comfortable talking about what was going on in your home at that time?
Yes. So my mother had mental illness, and I didn't understand this until I was older. And my dad was very controlling. So between the two dynamic parents that I had, and being the youngest of 5 children, I was set up in a home that wasn't a place where I could thrive. My oldest brother was almost an adult by the time I was 5, and my second oldest brother had just been sent away to foster care. And so I was in a home where one of the children had already been sent away, and I didn't understand what that meant or if that meant that I was next. And so everything was strange and changing at that time period.
Now, I just want to explain for people when you're a child, usually for all of us, home is the place where we feel safe. And when your home life isn't stable, nothing about you is going to be stable because the outside world, that's the tough, scary place. Coming home, when up into my 20s, my home life was kind of like that. It's like, no, I'm on home base. You can't tag me when I'm here. But so this try to understand that, listeners, being 5 years old, home is not safe. You have, geez, I'm trying to put it in perspective for people because this is heavy stuff. So, but
Very
go
heavy.
on. Hello?
So what was, when did you actually decide to go to the streets?
So there were a few things that happened before that. When my mom moved out, eventually my dad got married again. So when he married my first stepmother, she also had mental illness and actually had the same psychiatrist as my mother. And that didn't really work out well. And when I was 11, my dad took us for a family meeting at the hospital, and the psychiatrist on my stepmother's case at that time, decided that he wanted to keep me too, and my dad agreed. And I had no explanation for it. I was an angry kid, and I wanted to be at home in bed because it was summer, and she wasn't my mother, so I may have said things that weren't kind, but they weren't things that indicate that a child needs to be in the hospital. And so that's how everything began. My dad left me in the hospital for that summer when I was 11 for 2 months and 10 days. And that changed me because every kid that I was exposed to taught me about everything else. And as I went through the next several years, I kept meeting kids who taught me other ways to survive. If home isn't safe, they taught me what I could do. Every kid in that hospital had run away from home. Every kid in that hospital drank. I was the youngest child there, and I absorbed every detail that they taught me about how to find something different and find some solace. And they taught me, with alcohol, you forget. And so I wanted to try that because that was something better than what I was living at that time period.
Yeah.
So that was when it began. And when I left the hospital is when I started running away.
Now, what year was this about?
So the hospital when I was 11 would have been 1990.
Now, do you think it's because back then childhood psychology was still becoming a thing and it's like, oh, this kid has this problem, put him in a hospital? Was that kind of the rationale back then?
Maybe. I remember growing up, there were advertisements on TV talking about difficult children, and you could fix them by sending them to the hospital. And so there was a push in the
Okay.
media that there was an instant solution for bad kids. And the solution never depended on, fixing the home environment or looking at what was going on with the parents. It was always the child's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
well, and where were you living at this time?
That was where I was growing up in North Carolina.
Okay.
I lost the accent.
Oh, I noticed that. Yeah.
um let's I so let's do this. When did you first spend the night on the streets? And
When
what was that like?
when I was 11, I ran away from home the first time, and I didn't really plan. I left home. I had a small backpack. I brought no food. I wandered around like a nature trail by a museum where I grew up in the middle of the night and then ended up falling asleep in a playground. And the playground was near my elementary school. So when morning came, I went to school and had breakfast and went back on with my life like nothing had happened.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. And there's a lot of people, and obviously, well, first of all, if you're just joining us, we're here with Dr. Sheryl Recinos. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Yes.
Excellent. And you are a doctor.
Yeah.
That and looking at your website, which all your information will be
All the
posted.
links in the
Yeah,
description.
yeah, in the description. But you are a wife. Yeah, you are a mom. You're a wife. You're a physician. You're a writer, and you are a community volunteer.
Yes.
And oh gosh, I don't know. Everybody that listens to our show, is used to laughing and joking and carrying on. But there's also things that we've talked about on our show with different guests that are really pretty heavy. So it kind of
So
goes back and forth.
you're a kid from living in North Carolina, but somewhere along the way in your story, you ended up being a teen living on the streets of Hollywood.
Yes.
And this was also in the 90s. Like, where
Yes.
about in the 90s?
So in 1992, when I was 13, I was very upset and I was trying to figure out if I had any options. I had tried to convince my dad to send me to a boarding school and he wouldn't. And I really didn't want to go to foster care. I was not allowed to go stay with my mother because my dad had custody. And so one day I just snapped and I stole some money from my dad and I took a bus to Los Angeles. And that's when it began. And
And
I
you
didn't
were
even
how
pick
old
Los
at the time?
Angeles in a rational way. I just opened up a map and said, that's pretty far. That's where I'm going.
And you were
Wow.
how old at that time?
13.
Wow.
And you went clear across the country.
I did.
What was that like? I mean, so you
I've
just
traveled cross country on a bus, and it is not good at all. It is the
No.
worst thing. I went from Virginia to Los Angeles in the mid 90s. And then when I moved back to Jersey, it was Los Angeles to New Jersey on a bus. And, I was doing okay during those times. And it was still soul crushing doing something like that.
Yeah, maybe you were on my bus.
I was about to say, if you were on the streets of Hollywood in the late 90s, odds are me or Larry probably passed by you in Hollywood.
oh wow. Yeah.
Possibly.
That's crazy to think. That's really crazy to think. What was it like when you stepped off the bus in Los Angeles for the first time?
So it wasn't good. Unfortunately, because the bus is unsafe, as you alluded to, there was a gentleman who noticed that I was a runaway. And he told me that he would turn me in when we got to Los Angeles unless I went with him somewhere. And he took me somewhere not good and he raped me. And that was my welcome to Los Angeles moment. And so after that, I went back to the bus station and I was crying and I was a mess and trying to figure out what to do now because I'd learned what it costed to be a runaway kid on the streets with no one to protect me. And that was when someone came up to me and told me about programs in Hollywood where I could go and I could have shelter and have someone take care of me. And that was how I ended up in Hollywood the very first day.
Was my friend's place active back then in that early in the 90s?
They had a small shelter that I did go to once. They
Okay.
weren't as active as they are now. I actually went to LAYN when I got there for the first time.
Oh, okay.
I think now would be a good time. You wrote a book based on this. Now, how would you feel about like reading an excerpt from your book,
Okay.
because I think it's like really good that you led up to all this, and to actually hear you read it will be
Okay.
mind blowing, I think.
So I'm going to read an excerpt from when I was 17, and I had come back and I was more permanently on the streets at that point. So this is going to be in the summer of 1996. We were awakened by the sound of the cleaning man. Such an ordinary theme, but it struck me as strange that a closed theater had a cleaning man. We were staying in front of the Pantages Theater in those days. After we were up, we gathered our belongings and wandered back down to Gower. We sat in our corner booth at Burger Factory, Emma, Ava, and me. It had been a long weekend, and the hunger pains in our bellies screamed for breakfast, but services were always closed on the weekends. We'd run out of emergency chips and fresh fruit too soon this time. I pulled my last $2 bills out of my wallet and set it on the table. Do you guys have any money left? I asked. Ava shook her head sadly. She was younger than Emma, just 12. Her hair was growing out of its buzz cut, and she had 2 long wisps of dark blonde bangs framing both sides of her face that were tucked behind her ears. Her sweater was perfectly grungy and broken, and she wore steel-toed army boots that Emma had given her. A young runaway from Santa Monica. She was a childhood friend of Emma's, now lost out here just like us. I felt like I had to protect her from the mean streets around us, but I still had no idea how futile my attempts would prove to be. Emma reached into her pockets, searching. She slowly placed the contents of her pockets onto the faded orange tabletop. A lighter, scratched and well-worn. An almost empty pack of Marlboros. Not the good kind, but the stale ones from the lady on Santa Monica Boulevard who sold them for 2 bus tokens. 3 bobby pins to keep her short, wavy hair in place. A folded piece of paper, which I knew contained the lyrics to Alanis Morissette's song Perfect, a song that we'd belted out at the top of our lungs together when we'd been staying at the shelter. 3 bus tokens, those little copper-colored coins that could be exchanged for a ride, $1, or half a pack of smokes. A folded and torn services card with phone numbers for all the drop-in shelters and other service agencies in the area. We all had several versions of that services card. A quarter and 2 dimes. A Narcotics Anonymous chip. Damn, how was a 13-year-old already collecting NA chips, I wondered, not for the first time. I thought about my own AA book stashed in my backpack. We were all working some sort of program out here. I sighed. I felt responsible for them, although I knew that wasn't really true. I just didn't want them to taste the same fate I had. Emma's mom had abandoned her, and I really didn't know Ava's story. I'd met her dad once when he was passing out flyers in front of one of the other shelters. He had made missing posters with her face, pleading for answers. When he asked me if I knew her, I shook my head. We'll have to wait for the program to open to eat, I said softly. My stomach growled from waiting 2 days to eat. But I'll go buy us a cup of coffee so that they don't kick us out.
Wow.
There was only an hour and a half left anyway. No use spending every last penny when free cereal was literally waiting around the corner. I glanced up at the cashier. She had that look on her face, the one that said buy something or leave. I really wanted to use their restroom and wash my face, so I had to buy something. I walked over to her, forfeiting one of my last dollars for a cup of coffee, a cup that we would share. 1 free refill. We knew the drill. We couldn't stay long and couldn't have more than 1 free refill. Thank you, I said to the cashier, collecting the 29 cents in change. She eyed me with her usual disdain. I tapped the sugar shaker and emptied 10 seconds of sugar into the coffee before pouring a large amount of creamer into the cup to fill the last inch of space. Once stirred, I strolled back to the table and handed Emma my change. Keep it, I told her. I'll find more. Ava smiled, swiping one of the last strands of hair behind her ear. She loved the taste of warm coffee in the mornings, and Emma always chased the moment with a cigarette. I studied them for a moment, grateful for a brief reprieve from whatever was out there, waiting. I took a slow sip of coffee and passed it to the girls, too young to be out here. But I had learned something my peers had forgotten to share with me when I was 13. Sometimes the best advice isn't go home, girl. Sometimes it's stay alive. I wish I would have told Ava those words. None of us knew what was coming for us, for her. Afterwards, we parted ways. And then she was murdered a week later.
Oh my God.
God. Wow. Oh man. I tell you.
I want to say something for our
Yeah.
listeners in Los Angeles. When you see those kids on Hollywood Boulevard, asking for change, or the Third Street Promenade, not all of them are just there to be there. The majority of them are there because they have nowhere else to go. And I mean, I'm trying to verbalize this, right? But remember, they are people too. They don't, not, because I'm saying I had friends back in the 90s who were like, I don't want to be with my parents anymore. So I'm going to hang out with the gutter punks at the Third Street Promenade. But yet their families were really well off. There was no problems at all. They just
Right.
wanted to be punk rock. But then the majority of those kids, like with your story, are there because they don't want to be there. Wow. We are all just floored here right now reading something like that. And like I was saying, because I was in Hollywood during this time you're talking about and seeing, like, I know I'm repeating myself. Larry knows this too. The homeless kids, again, go to Hollywood, not so much anymore from the last time I was there, but back in the 90s and early 2000s, there were just swarms of kids out on the streets in Hollywood Boulevard, the Third Street Promenade, places where there's the most tourists and stuff like that. Now, again, the majority of them were there because they had nowhere else to go. Then you're going to have the hangers on that just want to have, I'm doing air quotes right now,
Yeah.
street cred. But again, when you see those kids, man, I'm going to let Larry go on because I'm a little verklempt right now.
Well, I think what how do you go from I guess to go back to my question is how did you decide to go to school or not just go to school but to become a doctor?
So that's a two-part question. So going to school, when I got out to Hollywood, I hadn't finished high school. And so I enrolled in a continuation school, and I actually finished my high school diploma while I was on the streets, which was pretty cool.
Wow,
They let me enroll even though I was a minor, and they let me take all the classes, and they were very supportive.
that's
May
great.
I ask which high school? Was it Hollywood High?
So there was first a program called Hollywood AWAC. It was
Okay.
Alternative Education and Work Center. And my last two classes were at Hollywood High because they didn't offer them at the AWAC. So my diploma says Hollywood High Community Adult School.
That's where I almost got my GED, but then I stopped to go on to community college.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Very cool.
So after that, I got into some community college classes when I first got off the streets. I attempted to get an apartment when I was 18, and it didn't last very long because when I found out I was pregnant, I ended up back in the shelter. I couldn't afford my rent and have a child. And so that first semester in college, I completed it. But when I went back to school, my major changed. So when I first started, I was working up at Universal Studios and I was trying to get a manager position. So I was taking business classes and marketing classes. I was really just aiming to do anything so I could just have a job. But then after I was pregnant and then I had my daughter, when I went back to school that following year, I fell in love with the hospital. I knew I wanted something bigger, and I started to have that idea of, being a doctor, even though it was something that I didn't really want to verbalize because there was just no way a kid like me could ever have that dream. And I enrolled in honors program when I got back to school, and I was in their transfer program so I could get into UCLA a couple years later. And it didn't work right away. I graduated from UCLA, but I became a high school teacher for a while before I finally pursued it.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah. So I was
Really?
working with kids. It was
That's
awkward.
pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Now what specialty of an MD are you? Or is it
Family
just
medicine.
family medicine? Very
Yeah,
cool.
so all the
And
ages.
So you're a hospitalist,
Hmm.
right? And actually, my father, he was a doctor. He was an ER physician, and
Okay.
he also doubled as a hospitalist, and he had his degree in general medicine. But
Hmm.
And I
it
wanted to, did
is
you say you worked at Universal Studios or
yeah.
you tried to work at Universal Studios?
So I worked on City Walk, and so I was like on the sales portion where we work with all the tourists, but I was in one of the stores there.
You
You
know, I
see,
was
it's
gonna
crazy
say,
how our
yeah,
lives
right.
definitely intersected multiple times because Larry worked
Yeah,
at Universal
I
Studios.
in the
probably asked you for a
entertainment
dollar.
department. Yeah, you know, actually, I don't know because I did Woody Woodpecker. I was Woody Woodpecker
I
in
was the bubble girl in front of Dappy.
Okay.
The bubble
oh my
girl.
god. Oh, that
Wow.
is how weird is this? That's so it's so weird, but it's so cool. But
And
that's
then I
what
was
it
at the
is.
smoothie shop and the glow in the dark store.
Yeah,
That's awesome. That's cool. Oh my god.
this is
Um,
crazy
it
how
is crazy.
lives intersect at
Hmm.
It
some
is.
point.
It is. And you know what I was gonna say was I know hospitalists like they
I
do
don't
like a
even know
whole
what that
gamut.
means
Well,
exactly. What does
it's
that mean, guys?
it's like well I'll give you my take and then obviously the doctor could
I
tell
think
you.
let's let the professional
I
go
want to hear what
first.
Larry
Let's
says.
do it. Let's do it. Uh, but it's amazing to me that you're a hospitalist and you're taking care of not just one person at one time, but a lot of people at one time. And could that, and I don't know, I mean, maybe it's just me, but could it be, is there a connection from you being out on the streets and then going into being a physician and taking care of all kinds of people instead of just one at a time? Because I
I
can only imagine.
I think so. One of the nurses I met in my ER also, she made a comment and I asked her, I'm like, wait a minute, where were you in Hollywood? And she told me she was also at LAYN. And so I have a nurse in my ER who went through the same challenges growing up and survived and came in to work with people. My best friend from that time period is working to get into the juvenile justice system. She wants to work in a juvenile hall. Other people I know who have made it from my friend's place, we have a very famous young lady who is an activist, and I went and listened to her give a TED talk last week.
Whoa.
And we generally, if we survive, we reach out and try to reach back and help the people that are in that same situation. We want more for them than what we had for ourselves.
Because from when you were reading your excerpt, it felt like you had maternal issues towards the others you were with right away, like a den mother quote unquote with all of them.
Yeah, I couldn't just leave a 12 and a 13-year-old out there knowing what I went through as a 13-year-old when I was on the streets. I just couldn't do it. And so I always, fed them first. I always made sure I had a couple of dollars in my wallet and I knew where to get food. So I just waited until the shelters opened.
It's like as you were telling your story, I immediately thought about the movie Where the Day Have any of
Which
you
movie?
ever Where the Day Takes You? It was about all these homeless kids living in Hollywood during the 90s. I forget the main star. Will Smith was in it. It's an
Okay.
incredible movie. You should all check it out.
I'll have to look at that. I missed a whole several years of
Yeah.
TV and music and everything. And
Oh,
so there's a
it's
whole
a
time period
recent
I didn't see
movie,
anything.
late 2000s.
Okay.
How did
I'll take a look at it.
how did you decide to write the book?
I always wanted to. I kept telling myself for years I was going to write this book, and everyone I talked to told me I needed to write a book. It's been a persistent story for many, many years. Every time people hear about, the time that I was on Jerry Springer, they're like, "You need to write a book." And
Wait, okay,
so
wait, wait. Oh, okay, hang on.
You
Hang on.
can't just
We,
drop that and
we
not know
I
okay.
was
it.
trying to just drop that and move on.
We should open the show with that. This is absolutely amazing. You were okay. Wait. I had got to ask: were you a guest or in the or in the audience?
So I was on the panel.
Oh, cool.
I feel very exploited, though. This is what he does here.
Oh, oh my.
Proof.
Whoa.
I'm showing a picture that I
Wow.
took from me on the show.
Oh my
It really
God.
happened.
Oh my gosh. That's absolutely amazing. Okay. When was this? This is amazing to know.
So that was also when I was 17. I describe it in the book. It's a very sad tale of being flown to Chicago and put on stage and having the whole crowd get angry with us and not really let us speak. And then we went back to the green room and received less compensation than we were told we were going to get. And then we were flown back to LA.
That's so messed
So
up.
I feel comfortable telling the story because he exploited me. So I'm going to tell what happened.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Okay.
we're all laughing now, Jerry Springer, but he did, and still today does continue to exploit people.
Oh
He
yeah.
does.
I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
there's the dumb things they do, but then what they would do to kids like you, because I remember those episodes,
Mm-hmm.
that's just straight up evil to fly you guys out there. And what if, what if you guys would have got lost along the way or something? Then you're
I
even,
tried to get lost. They wouldn't let me.
oh, okay.
Oh man. Okay, so is there anything else we should know before we go? That's really awesome. Um uh oh my gosh,
Well,
that is
after it aired, well, first of all, when it aired at LAYN when I was in the shelter, they had a little party for me in the evening. They made popcorn and all the kids watched it. And I felt kind of terrible after it aired because they took out all the parts that made us look like normal kids and made us look like terrible teenagers.
right.
So I was upset, and everybody kind of gave me a group hug and calmed me down. And the next day, when I was walking on Hollywood Boulevard, a police car pulled up next to me, and they're like, "Hey, you look good on TV." So apparently, they were watching the show too.
Actually it's how were the police? How were they were they very understanding? Obviously, it's like 50-50, or was there some police out there that were understanding, or was it just not good?
I have actually, so there is part of the book I haven't told you. So I have a very unnatural fear of police. So going back to when I first went to Hollywood when I was 13 and took money from my dad, he ended up pressing charges against me for that $250. And in North Carolina, they decided that meant I needed to go to maximum security for up to 2 years
What?
to serve time for taking money from my dad so I could run away and not starve. And so I ended up doing 10 months of that sentence. But for the rest of my life, I was terrified of ever getting arrested again. And so every time I saw police, I was in avoidance mode. And, there were times when, that was definitely a problem because when I was in Santa Monica, I threw a Cheeto down to the pigeons one time just because I was bored. And two police officers came up and they started to interrogate me.
Oh,
And they asked me, like, how many times have we told you not to feed the pigeons? And I'm like, never. And they're like, no, really, how many times have we told you? I'm like, never, sir. And so then they asked me why I wasn't in school. And I'm like, well, it's 4:30 in the afternoon, but I went to school earlier today. And they're like, well, we're writing you a ticket. But the whole purpose of the ticket wasn't just to write a ticket. They were writing tickets to street kids because if you don't show up to court, then the next time they try to get you, they have a bench warrant for your arrest because you didn't show up to court for that small ticket. So I went as a 17-year-old to court and stood in front of the judge and said, yes, ma'am, I did feed the pigeon. I'm sorry. And she let me off.
wow.
Yeah, that was terrifying.
I could imagine. Yeah.
I can
So I'm not
absolutely
allowed to feed pigeons in Santa Monica.
right. Note to self. Note to self.
Yes, never again.
I can only imagine what it's like for you doing, like, giving back to your community, and seeing these kids, that were there. They're like you. um what is the biggest thing that you try to get across to these kids?
I want them to know that they can still define their future however they want. I'm sure you read on the website, I started a scholarship fund this year for the youth. One of the biggest, most important things for me when I overcame homelessness and I was in an apartment and I was going to school was that my friend's place organized for a scholarship for me for $1,000 so that I could continue my studies. And so one of the things that has always been on my bucket list was to start a scholarship fund to pay that forward so that other kids could have that chance. Because for me, that made the difference and helped me stay in school so I could graduate from UCLA. And so I started that fund back in April, and I'm putting 5,000 at least every year into the fund. And we've already had 4 kids claim it this year.
Wow.
And they're in school studying. You know, these are kids that are going to be somebody, because every kid you save, they're going to turn around and reach back and save as many more as they can. And maybe not the kids from Hollywood, but they'll raise their kids in a better environment than the one that they were raised in. And so
Yes.
these are valuable people to save. So I'm very excited to see where that goes.
Now, if people wanted to participate in that, is there links on the webpage?
Yes, I link directly
Donate?
back to my friend's place.
Okay.
Okay, and we will put the link in the description
Mhm.
in this podcast.
Thank you.
For sure. Absolutely.
Well,
I don't even know if we've touched the surface in all this.
no, we didn't at all.
It's a very
No.
long book.
Yeah. Well, but see, that's the thing. And, you know, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, well, you got to buy the book to understand it. But no, really, you really do have to buy the book. Because this isn't just your story. This is their story too. And, you know, it's like Eric said, these are people that you look at and you walk past them and you don't understand. And I hope for this podcast that people are listening, that the next time they go out, and yeah, they'll put headphones in, and you know, actually that's one of the things. Let me go off a little bit, because, you know, I notice, because I try to engage people and just look people in their eye and just kind of, you know, nod. But people look straight ahead. They don't want to look to the left. They don't want to look to the right. And I mean, I get it. I understand. You know, they don't want to be bothered. But there is something to be said of just giving people just like a show that they're there. I mean,
I agree. I remember that was one of the things that was the most painful, is when people ignored the situation. I valued so much more when people said, no, I'm sorry, or no, I can't, or I can't afford to help, I don't have any money, those sorts of things. That was so much more valuable to me than somebody completely ignoring the situation in front of them. Although I did have one guy that came up to me and my friend and said, if I bought you a sandwich, you wouldn't even eat it. And I'm like, yes, I would. Walk me to the store. Let's go get a sandwich. And he bought me and my friend a sandwich and sat there and watched us eat it to make sure that we would. It was the funniest thing.
That's, you know, and just to hear you say that it wasn't, you know, it wasn't about somebody giving you money or whatever. It's just them acknowledging you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I
So
tell you.
I have a strict policy with my kids. We keep a case of water in the car and like granola bars, and we hand those out when we see people. And so my kids grew up knowing that we give back. And so they're always the ones that spot people. They're like, okay, here's who we're going to give it to. Or if we go out to eat and we have our leftovers, we walk down the street and find someone to give it to.
Very cool.
So
And
that's how they've changed.
do they know about your history?
So my youngest child, so my kids are 14, 17, and 20. My 14-year-old read through the whole book first before anybody else. And she was so funny. She texts me, she's like, Mom, I'm crying. I'm like, why? She's like, I got to the part where you met Dad. I really hope it works out. I'm like, well, he's upstairs, so I'm pretty sure it worked out.
Awesome.
You know the end of that story.
14, so what can I say?
That's great.
And then my daughter, the 14-year-old, she's actually on the cover. And then my 20-year-old is an art major, and she designed the cover.
Ah, that's perfect. And we're gonna put like pictures and everything up, and it's just, I tell you, we should have you back. And actually, I don't know what we talk about. Maybe about like your work that you're doing, because I want to, maybe what we should do is have you and oh gosh, the
This one of
scholarship
the
fund.
scholarship
Yeah,
kids, maybe
yeah,
something
yeah.
like
Maybe
that.
have them come on and talk. And because I tell you, I gotta admit, I'm pretty inspired right now. And whatever I can do, and I think I speak for Eric, whatever we can
Yeah,
do
totally.
collectively or individually, please, we are here. We're here.
Okay.
So
Well,
please
thank you.
come back, and just we'd love to help you spread positivity.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so in closing, maybe you came into this podcast wanting to hear me and Larry be funny and silly again with guests. You got that at the beginning.
That's
But
right.
you
That's
got to
right.
hear an incredible story of what life is all about, being down but then being willing to fight for yourself and to get better, because no one, other people will be in your corner, but only you can make the decision to fight for what you want in life. Now, maybe you were not, maybe right now where you're listening to this, you're not a homeless kid living on the street, but maybe you're battling with some form of depression, or you think you could never make it in what you want to do. Well, our friend here's story is there pointing at you and laughing and saying, yes, you can. If I did it, anyone can do it. So definitely let this podcast seep into you. It is one of the most important podcasts I think we've ever done. Definitely one of the most serious. So again, don't just let this one go past you. There will be links in the description to where you could purchase the book. Definitely purchase it and not just read it, learn from it. Let it help you and guide you to understand that no matter where you are in life, you can achieve what your dreams are. And everyone who's listening to this, have a happy and
Oh,
safe.
Eric, actually, that's one thing that we didn't talk about, where you could, because I want, where can you pick up the book? Can
So
you
it
just?
it will be available on October 30th, the day before Halloween.
Okay, awesome. And it
Ooh,
will be
Okay.
on
So
like on
I'm planning to have
Amazon.
it on Amazon. I'm still working to try to get it into stores. And then there will
Awesome.
be an ebook. And I've commissioned somebody to do an audiobook of it for the people that don't like to read.
Like
that's
Larry.
perfect. That's perfect. That's so
Everyone,
perfect.
thank you all for coming, for listening to the show. On October 29th, me and Larry will go all over our social media stuff to remind people to check
Yes.
out the episode. And in fact, even though October is horror month, we will be putting this episode up on October 29th so it could go along with the release of the book and everything.
Yes.
Everybody, have a happy and safe and wonderful week or weekend.